Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sort of spearheading the Perform Festival, which is, I think, a unique combination of different events. My name is Igor Clark. I will be sort of a little bit of a moderator on stage, and I was going to introduce a few words about the historical importance, the legacy of Trio A, but I had the chance midnight last night to Zoom with Yvonne Rainer, who is now 90, and soon 90, sorry, never mind. And we just figured out the sound, and I tried to cut together a little video of her giving some answers to some of the questions I was asking her about her experiences with this city, which are very important, and also the past and present of Trio A. And I now hope that it's going to work with me.
Well, I'm Yvonne Rainer. I'm a choreographer and filmmaker and performer. And I've been working since 1960, I guess. And I've made 7 feature-length films and returned to dance through the auspices of Barishnikov's dance company, and was very glad to return to working with dancers. Yeah. Yeah. So you ask about my time in Berlin in the early 70s. I had a grant to spend a year there, and I was already thinking about a new film, especially since the Baader Meinhof gang was still active. In fact, they weren't caught and incarcerated until I got back. But they were really protesting the existence of ex or previous Nazis in the German government. And West Berlin was a very strange place. It was surrounded by the wall still, and it was concentrated with people from all over the world who had similar grants. And so it was a cultural haven, you might say. And so I spent my time talking to people and reading the news and taking notes. And I even had some footage filmed that went into the final film. And I worked on it. It was finished in about a year. I forget the exact date. It was called Journeys from Berlin, 1972. It was interesting. I made some lasting friends and kept up with the news and yeah,
Great.
read a lot and oh, and interestingly enough, I was staying in this luxurious apartment that was owned by a professor who had been earmarked or persecuted as a communist and had to move out of Germany and was living in Berlin and they sublet her apartment to me, and she had the complete works of Marx and Stalin and in her library. So I had no complaints about where I was put up. Yeah. Changed. Well, I like to say that when I'm gone, uh, even before I'm gone, there's some people who are only familiar with that work of mine, a 5-minute dance that took me 6 months to create in the late 60s or mid 60s. And so I keep fiddling with it, and there are all kinds of versions of it that contradict its original uh, assumptions. I mean, one of the peculiarities of it was that I never look at the audience. So if I'm facing the audience, my head is going around or I'm looking somewhere else. And much later version of it has someone running around me while I do it, or while another performer does it, while keeping the gaze of the performer within his gaze. Um, so there are all these different versions. One person teaches it in retrograde. He learned it backwards, which is very peculiar. It could I would never have conceived of originally performing it or creating it in that way. What else? It's been performed nude. It's been performed with flags, American flags, to protest the war in Vietnam. Um, yeah, there are just different occasions for its use, like a war, at Judson Church. There was an anti-war exhibition of works, and I was invited. And so putting the flag and nudity, it seemed a good idea. And I mean, there are all kinds of people who know the dance now, and there were six of us who took off our clothes and tied American flags around our necks. Um, oh yeah, I even performed it a few years ago. It was at Judson on a group program. I talked while I did it, and I
Wow.
was in my early 80s. Well, I talk about the difficulty of doing it at that age, and to my surprise, the audience, which was very familiar with the dance, laughed all through it. I mean, like when I got down on the floor, I would say, well, why isn't this way of getting up just as good as the original? And they laughed, because they knew what I was referring to. And it's useful in challenging the standards of technically trained proficiency in dance. Yeah. And why
Hmm.
can't older people be just as interesting in ways as younger ones? Yeah. It's just useful in expanding the ways we think of dance as being like the original version is the primordial one. And well, it isn't. It can be, uh, it can change. Yeah.
Difference?
This is a dance that has so many details. It must be taught, learned from in person by a transmitter. You can't, I try and forbid people from learning it from a version I did in the 70s. I hadn't danced for a while, and so it's imperfect. And the cinematography eliminates the floor patterns, and so people think they can learn it from that, and they can't. It's totally different when you learn it from a live transmitter. Uh, Someone came to my knocking on my door many years ago who had supposedly learned Trio A from someone who had learned it from me, I guess, many years previously. And it was almost unrecognizable. So, yeah, the transmission is an odd thing. And yes, the film of me I think it was 16 millimeter or yeah, they yeah, doing um, Trio A in a studio. I always felt was very imperfect because I hadn't danced for a while. I had been making films, and so I try and take it off the internet, but it always gets back on, and there's always someone who sends me a version of their trio A that they have learned from that what I consider a very imperfect version of it, and I can't control it, and I've resigned myself to that. So it will be continue to be disseminated and destroyed in various ways. But that the continuity is the first thing to go, you know, the uninflected continuity of the dance. And to my latest demonstration of that is to Emily Coates. I asked her to do a version of it to a Satie uh, piece of music with all these pauses. So it's very clear. She does the phrases, but there are all these pauses in the wrong places. And so it makes very, very clear what the original is supposed to be. So keeping that particular characteristic of the dance is very important, and it's the first thing to go. Even the experienced dancers, I at various intervals, I look at them again and make corrections, mostly in terms of that kind of continuity. Yeah, I think that was the most not revolutionary, but unusual or innovative aspects of the dance.
Mm-hmm.
It never prioritizes a jump or a feat of virtuosity. You know, it kind of smooths over and equalizes every part of the dance. And I myself, I feel there was only one experience I had where I felt it was perfect. I had been ill and I was recuperating at home, and I was rehearsing in the Judson gym, and I was still a little bit fragile. And I did it, I thought, with utter perfection, you know? And so it's an ideal, right? Yeah.
So I'm very happy that we managed to get Yvonne to take over the part of historical summation of how the work came about, and some of her thoughts in sort of working on the work since it was first performed. I hope you all caught that the 78 video she talks about that she can't control is also that one over there. So but the interesting thing is that, as she says, the work continues to be alive and to be performed, and we have been the witness of one of those instances here. We have three brilliant dancers who have performed Trio A in their own ways, and alongside each other separately, and who've been guided by Sara. And so our idea was to speak for a few minutes before we clink and celebrate the work, to celebrate the process of transmission, of teaching, of keeping this work alive and bringing it into, there's a few brilliant books that exist about the work. It's inside of a lot of important art historical compendiums, but it also exists in the muscle memory, in the sort of lived memory of the official transmitters like Sara, and now in the muscle memory of Emily, Esther, and Fred. So with that, I would love to pass on to Sara. I'll be around, and we might at some point hand over to some questions if you have them. But yeah.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you. Thank you so much. Just really quick, and I'm mental noting some of the things that Yvonne said that I want to touch on, so I'm going to hopefully hold those in my head. But before I start with that, just one huge thanks for having us here. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've been very well taken care of, so thank you to the whole museum staff, to Klaus Biesenbach, to Gregor, to Lisa. And also these things do not happen with just the people you're seeing up here. So big thanks to the dancers who we do see up here, but also Kian McCon, who's been our project manager, Performa in New York, but also, but also the staff and the guards of this museum. We could not have put this on without their participation, and they worked very hard to accommodate us. And I just want to kind of call them out, as they're also laborers on this, and they often are invisible. So I just want to say thank you to the amazing guards. It's interesting to hear Yvonne's. This is the first time I've seen this interview. Obviously, I know Yvonne. As you can hear right away, she reads the newspaper. She reads the New York Times from front to back pretty much every day, the paper version. She's incredibly political, socially engaged. I can talk a little bit about how her work and even the choreography and the methodologies of it include her politics. So for example, I'm mental noting other things I want to say, that in Trio A, no movement is more important than any other movement. So there's a politics in that about equity. And so she's quietly and almost poetically, although she probably wouldn't like the word poetic, inserting her politics in her dances and in the methodologies. And on that note, I also want to say we're here today at the same time, not very far from here, there's a dance demonstration happening in Berlin to make a statement about the value of dance and treatment of dance and the value of that economically. And as you can see, people want to see dance. And I had the pleasure of working with some incredible Berlin-based dancers, and Klaus Biesenbach said, I want you to work. There was a remit to work with local dancers, and they've been absolutely amazing. We had 80 some applications for 3 roles, and honestly, given enough time, I probably could have worked with all of them. So there's an incredible talent here. So in solidarity, we're here saying that we support dance and believe dance should have funding and is valuable. Yeah, I don't know how to. And back to Yvonne, she was also alluding to the fact that the dance has many variations, and in rehearsal, my attempt is to transmit this dance to the best of my ability, and yet the only documentation is this film. So there's a confusion sometimes around what this original is. And I like to think of actually this is an ongoing, never-ending process of trying to land this dance. And even though I've learned it in 2010 from her, when I get the chance, I do what's called a tune-up, as you tune up your car. So I either, I used to see Yvonne in person when we both lived in Los Angeles, but now I'll videotape a version of mine and we'll look on Zoom, and she will always have corrections. So there's no landing on the perfect Trio A. And I like that this is called muscle memory, because I performed today thinking, dear God, I'm probably going to forget what comes next, because there's a distrust of the muscle memory. So maybe that's a good point just to go. Thank you. To a few things just to share. I won't talk very long, but just to share a bit about this idea of muscle memory and transmission. I learned this dance in 2010 from Yvonne. I had studied with her at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. I wanted to continue working with her, and I said I'd really love to learn Trio A. If you trained in dance, it's part of the canon. It almost feels like it's part of your body. And it was something that was important for me to learn, and I said I'd like to learn it to teach it. And then she said, oh, okay. And this was in a diner in Los Angeles, very informal. And she said, okay, that's great. You will be the 5th transmitter. And I said, what's a transmitter? I had no idea. And okay, there are already 5. At the time, there were 5 dancers. I would be the 5th. And so we got in the studio. It took about 60 hours to learn a 4.5-minute dance because of the articulations. And when I was looking at applications for dancers for this, I thought, number one, they have to learn really quick, because we had a week and a half, and these dancers were absolutely blew my mind. And is it okay, Fred, if I say about your relationship to the video? Fred came into rehearsal and he'd already learned it from the video, and I said, "You did what?" He'd already learned the whole thing. So in a way, he almost had to unlearn parts of it to learn it again. But they picked up incredibly quickly and were amazing and made my job really easy. I think when I was working with Yvonne, it was also important to get her language and capture her language. So I'll go back to this slide. In my attempt to capture what she would say, the movements, also the gaze, where the eyes are looking is another layer, spacing, so the whole spatial mapping, and then another layer is pacing, timing, which is one of the hardest things. The first movement, if you saw the dance, when you're swinging your arms, sets the pace for the entire dance. That's why the dancers fall out of sync. So you neither speed up or slow down across those 4.5 minutes. So there's a real challenge to keep to your own timing of that first movement. So that's an ongoing challenge. It was notated. There's a notation system for dance. There's a few, Banash, and Laba notation. So it was actually notated by two notators, Melanie Clark and Joukje Kolf. You have to be able to read this language. I know it a bit, but I'm not an expert, so I couldn't teach it from this. So if people want to learn it from the Laba notation score, they can pay someone who can read this. She's not that happy with the version she's seen from this. She still stands behind live transmission, but she's a bit happier about this than she is about the film. These are just my notes. This is just one way to say of how I try to remember the dance. So I said, I don't trust my memory 30, 40 years down the road, so I just said to Yvonne, I'm going to write down and kind of draw each movement. That's the first card, that's the second. And I'm trying to capture her language. Bend knees, play rocks on the end of a string. That's 3, and that's 8. So it gets more and more complicated as you go along, and there are about 100 of these note cards. I've not had to use them yet, but it's the security system in a way that if Yvonne's no longer here to ask her questions, and I'm still asking questions, which I've had in this process, at least I've written it down, and it's in this kind of pack of cards. And I did ask her once, I said, Yvonne, over a glass of wine, I said, when you're no longer here, what do you want me to do when I can no longer dance this or even teach it? And she said, well, then you train the next certified dancer to do it. So it continues. So I've got someone in mind, actually, who's about 30 years younger than me, so she might come up and do that. I'm just going to finish with, and then I'm going to ask some questions and bring in the dancers. I'm very, very interested in this phenomenon of dance in the museum, which has been happening. I mean, you can draw it back to about 100 years ago, but in terms of the Contemporary Art Museum, in the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, it's become a thing. I'm fascinated with that, and I'm both a practitioner and also a researcher, and in 2020 I did a PhD at the Center for Dance Research at Coventry University to really start to think about this phenomenon of dance in the museum. And I think I'm less interested in the product of dance in the museum and more about the practice and what is it to have human beings moving and being in the museum in the kind of relational, social aspect and what that does to the institution. And this is just a beautiful photo of the dancers warming up and just sort of what that does to a space. You take up the carpet, you've got dancers lying on the floor, you've got different use of the space and giving kind of permission to other ways of being in the museum. And in this book that I had the pleasure to co-edit with Siobhan Davies in London in 2015, Who Cares? Dance in the Gallery Museum, starting to think about this idea of care and curation. And I interviewed curators and dance artists to ask them, why are you bringing dance into the museum? Why, as a dancer, do you want to be in the museum? And it was Catherine Wood, curator of performance at Tate, who said this beautiful thing. And I said, what does it do for Tate? And she said, well, Tate is an institution made up of individual people. And she actually believes that having danced in the museum at Tate over the last 15 to 20 years has shifted the way the museum operates. And I won't go into detail with that, but I think there's something about the human liveness. And again, going back to the guards, and some of them that are back here are amazing, is connecting with the human ecology of the museum. Everyone in the museum, not just the audiences, but the staff and the people who inhabit that museum, and how can we actually find ways of being together in this space and finding equitable ways and visible ways and seeing people and connecting in these ways. So I think Yvonne's work is a great way to think about ways of being together in equitable ways. As I said, Trio is a good example of that. Much more I could say, but I would love to turn to the dancers and ask them a bit about their experience of being in the studio, learning this dance in the last week and a half. I'd particularly be interested to hear from Esther sharing on why she's speaking some of the words of the movements. Be interested if Fred is interested in speak about the video versus learning it from me. I'm just throwing these out there, but talk if there's something else more compelling for you to speak about. And Emily, I don't have a specific question for you, but I'd love to hear from you. I'm just coming off the top of my head.
Hi. I ended up in the second day of rehearsal, I think it was. I have a torn meniscus, and it felt like it was going to be okay. And in the second rehearsal, it was very clear that it was not okay. And I think that what's amazing, or feeling this inclusiveness, especially in this piece, that there was a possibility for me to still be in the production, because there are so many different versions of this. And so I was then taking on the responsibility of, then if I can't do the movement, then I need to speak the movement. And when Yvonne had also done that before, and Sarah had also said, so you'd done a version of saying each part of the...
Yvonne Rainer has a version called Trio A geriatric version.
So, yeah.
She's not geriatric.
Not yet.
But Yvonne couldn't do the handstand, so she just stands and goes handstand and moves on. So when you were struggling, I emailed Yvonne. I said, "Can she just say the movement, or is there another solution?" And she just one sentence response said she either modifies, does the movement half, or she doesn't do the movement. She says the movement. So we went for the second.
Yeah, we tried to do the modification, but I think the speaking actually had a bit more power, and I think also for us together as a trio, when we're doing it together, it gives something else to the dance instead of me trying to halfway modify the movement.
But it also reveals Yvonne's language, because Yvonne gives a name. There's either a name or a number or an image to every single movement, which is what my cards were trying to capture. So the first movement is rocks on the end of a string. There's another movement that is called dog pissing on a fire hydrant. There's another movement that's called Martha Graham. There's another movement that's called allow the ballet arm. Sometimes you count 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a whole script. And so everything is given it. So was kind of revealing some of the language underneath the dance and what goes on in the head of the dancer.
Hi. Does it work? Yeah, I could talk a lot, but I was wondering, the audience, maybe they have a question now that has formed, and maybe Emily would answer that. How about it? I mean, I do mine as well. I'm very happy to just actually speak, but I thought maybe it would make a different dynamic. If anybody had a question. No? Okay. It doesn't matter. I mean,
we can just give everyone a moment, and then while you talk, I'll move around and suggestively hold the microphone in front of people.
Yes.
I was asked about the video. I mean, when I knew I had the job, which was just a week before we began or whatever it was, I was like, okay, I'll look this up. And it wasn't said that I mustn't watch the video, but I could feel it. I don't know what it was exactly. But then I was like, oh my God, there she is. She's doing it. Oh my God, that's beautiful. It's flawless. You know, it's like, there's a little bit of all of it in there that I knew, kind of Trisha Brown, Merce Cunningham, this kind of the equality, the easiness, but the exactness, all of that. I was like, oh, I'm going to learn that now. You know, there was no holding back and there was another reason why I wanted to learn it. And then, of course, I knew the real moment happens with Sarah and you guys. But I didn't know you would have that out there, which I find quite contradictory, because we heard her not liking this, but it's here, you know, as a big reference. It's running on a loop, and, you know, it's more than us visible. But I mean, I'm not against it.
But just to clarify, I think she feels strongly it's not to be used to learn the dance. But I've never heard her say she doesn't want people to see it. But she thinks if it's out there, and I'll say too, I don't know if it's true, but if you think about the politics of choosing, there are now 7 of us, making the choice to say the best way to learn this dance is to bring in a live dancer. We're paid to do this. It keeps money going to dancers rather than YouTube.
Damn right.
But that's my thought thinking.
Maybe I'm going to go on with actually this a little bit, and I'm going to look at it in a matter of what is transmission, or how did I experience that, because there's Because one is mid-60s. This museum was born, I was made, and this dance was made, and it's all happening at one point. And that's one of the sources for me. I was actually born when she made this puzzle, very clear dance that in my eyes is so 60s, the way it's constructed. It reminds me of Marguerite Duras, where every word is done like cette ville a été créée par la taille de mon amour. You know, it's like really constructed with a lot of space. And this is one of the sources, just how I learned from the dance. And then because I'm also from that era, actually, and then there are the references of, I lived in New York, there's a homecoming with the work ethics, actually, that I met through you. Then there is the knowing of Trio A, which I knew at Laban many, many years ago, but I didn't quite know what it was. You know, actually the remembrance of who has danced it, how have they danced it. Steve Paxton, I've met him, like, you know, Cage, you know, there's a lot of references that actually have a role. And then, of course, there's Sara, who, it's a, you know, when you're that old and you live in this new world and it's all about the handy and all about that, and then you're like, oh my God, we are in a room with this transmitter who is alive and open and really handled the needs we had just with this complete generosity and positivism. You know, it was very easy learning it of Sara. And then there is the library of her body, which is, I could see the remembrance and then the exactness and the settlement of the dance in her. It's just like, okay, that's a few years down the line. And then there is Yvonne, who is alive, who we had with us every day because you involved us in your relation with her, which is, you know, it's almost like you're going through a mini education. It's not just the dance, it's like you have a whole world, and all of this is transmitting, I guess, you know, all of these actually, it's very rich, and it's almost I'm at home when I'm very happy.
Just really quick, thank you for that, and it's been a really wonderful journey, and I think it is important for me to bring Yvonne into the room and try to tell anecdotes and bring her as a person. There's a person behind the dance, but I'll just say really quickly, because you mentioned the 60s, and I'll end with this. There's a slide of street action that we reconstructed in Poland, in Wrocław, Poland, last month. It was the first time we think it's been done again. It's not a protest dance, she would say, it's an action. But it's dancers moving through the street very slowly, and it was done in response to the Vietnam War and the Kent State shooting in the States, and they wanted this, so they asked me if I could do it. I'd never done it before, and asked Yvonne, is it okay? And yes, that's fine. But she did say, what are they protesting? Because I love that. It's like, if you're going to do this dance, what are they protesting? So I went back to the curator, what are you protesting? The war in Iraq. Okay, and we did this, and it was absolutely amazing. Police came, they showed up, they heard it was going to happen, and they ended up actually being very supportive of it. Many people were asking about it, and it started all this dialogue around. It's a bit about mourning and loss. So there's just many of her works that we carry on, not just Trio A. But Emily, did you want to say anything before we move to the audience? Because I want to give you a chance too, if you want to say anything.
It's been a pleasure to learn it and to be part of the transmission and this kind of ongoing muscle memory through different generations of people learning this work. So it feels like a very special thing to be part of. Thank you.
You'll catch her in many museums dancing. She was in the Perici work as well at the Hamburger Bahnhof.
Well, I think, yeah, exactly. That's what I know about you, is that you are used to dancing in the museum, and I think my questions for you would be sort of, is there one thing that is different about dancing in a museum than in a sort of more dedicated dance space, other than the floor being different and being more squeaky? and also, is there a very specific thing about Trio A that's much different to learn, other than what we've heard sort of from how sort of other dances are being taught in museums, or is it more, perhaps it's even this way of teaching has been so influential that now more things are being taught this way?
Well, yeah, I have worked quite a bit in museums lately, performing in dance or performance works. And yeah, the concrete floor is something to get used to. But I find it a really interesting way of performing, because you're much more with people rather than you're on the stage in the lights and you can't see anybody in the audience. So it's a really special thing as a performer to have that closeness to the audience. You can look at them, you can speak to them, or see them, but that's also a different thing in the context of Trio A, because the gaze never lands on the audience. You're always doing your dance and looking in the directions which are very clear, and you don't meet the eyes. So yeah, in this instance, I really had the feeling, the energy from the audience, but not, although I am with you there, I'm not directly engaging with you. So it's quite different for me compared to the last few pieces I've been doing.
Just really quick, one more quote of Yvonne on that note is, the dancer's doing the business of dancing, the audience is doing the business of watching, and you just happen to be in the same room together, also on equal terms.
And both you and I could go on for a few more half hours about how, in fact, the innovation of this dance is as much with the engagement with the audience as it is with the dancing body and the movements of dance. But instead of expounding on that, maybe we now do open it up to the audience a little bit. If there are any questions that you would like to ask of Sara, of the dancers.
I was wondering, when I saw you, two questions. A, when you do it, the three of you, is it you, because it is always different? Do you sometimes have the fear of bouncing into each other, or is this kind of all, because it's not, because you start at the same point and then you're kind of in your own sphere, I understand. Maybe you could give me some feedback on that. And then my second question, because I'm not a dancer, muscle memory. Is this something, whenever you learn a dance, is it something you actually never forget? Or is this in particular one that you might now never forget because it's so particular? Thank you.
The first question,
Bouncing
into each other. I think that we had some near misses the last couple of days. But it's interesting because even though you're in your own space, I never had the feeling, because we weren't looking at each other, but you can somehow feel peripherally where someone else is, even though there were a couple times where we were really like this towards each other, but it never had the feeling, it never felt dangerous or precarious. It always felt like it was a little bit exciting to see what would happen. And I think some of us too, there were moments when one of us would just stop because you had to wait, because there's no way you could move without stepping on somebody or jumping into somebody. So, but I think we're doing pretty well.
They have a brilliant sense of spacing and time, and that's a dancer skill of temporal spatial sensitivity.
Did you want to answer the second question?
Well, maybe the number one, I wish it would happen more often, because that's what the moment brings alive, when there's like, oh fuck, I have to, like, how, like, am I waiting, how long, like, who's behind me right now, am I allowed my leg goes out or not? And these are moments that are great, because then it becomes alive, then you don't just do what you do, you kind of, and I guess this is, what actually Yvonne would be, now you deal with it, what is this, what does that mean in life when this actually happens? Are you going, or are you waiting, or are both going? So actually, today I wished it would have happened more, but we have 2 more days to go. But it's not that I want that it actually happened, but if it happens, it's exciting, I find.
But I think the one thing that's a little bit difficult about that is it's exciting, but we can't comment on it, right? It's exciting, but you still, this feeling, also the way that the gaze and where we're looking or not looking, we're very much still trying to be in our own space. And I think that sometimes gets difficult when you know that it's a near miss and that your body wants to react and you cannot.
But I think there's this expectation in dance of connection. The dancers are connected to each other. We're connecting to the audience. She's not interested in connection. She's interested in complicating spectatorship and putting the problem on the audience in terms of their own consciousness around it and how you because you might come to a dance performance and be hugely disappointed that there aren't any big kicks or any highs or lows. Everything's quite the same. She's interested in making it complicated to look at, and the complexity of that and the awareness of the spectator coping with that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for this. I'm interested in how Trio A, because Yvonne Rainer talked about how it changed over the years. And I'm interested in how that happened, whether Yvonne actually takes on some elements from the dancers. So do the dancers have agency in the changing of the piece? Is it that Yvonne perhaps saw them do a movement in a slightly different way and said, oh, why not do it like that? Or does it all rest with her mind and her body? That's my question.
I don't try to speak for her, but I speak from my experience and my understanding. I don't think so. I think there's a mechanics to it. There is a mechanics to the sequencing. And my sense is, if you look at the video, things are a bit more loose. But I also argue, if you look at John McEnroe playing tennis in the 60s, and you look at Serena Williams, we have also, there's a different technique, there's a different speed. And I guess when she was starting to kind of think about her legacy, and when she saw a trio A she didn't recognize, and she reined it in and started having certified transmitters, in the act of teaching something, you have to be able to articulate it. So I think the articulation of things became more precise. So it might look more technical now, but I always say, look, as long as you get the mechanics right, it can look it can look however it looks. Unlike a Cunningham dance piece where you see the Cunningham dancers and everyone kind of looks the same or similar, I was very interested in a diverse cast in which they weren't going to look the same doing it, but the mechanics are there, and getting the mechanics is very important, and there's not a lot of slippage there. It's here, it's not here, and I don't think she would have seen something and just thrown that in. I think she's trying to capture a mechanics that was there from the beginning, but it looks maybe a bit sharper now.
I have a little bit not really on-topic question. I'm artist myself. I do modern art, and I'm here for Andy. Yeah, you get me a little bit off guard. I don't know many things about you. And what I want to ask you is, normally I don't ask such questions because they are not very useful. But the world is in a very bad shape at the moment. We have a lot of conflicts, and my question to you is: do you take any? Do you make any comments about the situation in the Middle East or in the Ukraine or in your art, or you avoid this like me? I say I never do any sort of comments in my art about the conflicts there. Do you do in your dance sometimes make a stand about the conflicts? You got my question?
Yeah. No, thank you for that. In thinking about Yvonne Rainer's work, because Trio A is a work of Yvonne Rainer, and it's not my work, but I'm here to transmit her work. I think her work is not didactic in its politics. I don't think it's trying to be loud. I don't think she's the kind of artist that would put up a banner, fuck the war, but she would put up a banner that says, why are we in Vietnam? Why are we in Vietnam? Not why are they? But she's interested, and this was something she actually did in a workshop in New York. She just put up a banner while she was teaching a workshop to get us to think about why are we not them. Soldiers are in Vietnam, but why are we? So she wants to include everyone in their own consciousness around these moments. But I'll say personally, what I love about her work and dance in general is learning how to be in the room together and see each other. Or be in the room together and not have to see each other, but be gentle and respectful of other people's space and their way of doing things.
I would say historically I have a recommendation. Yvonne wrote an autobiography with, it's one of my favorite artists' autobiographies, also great title, Feelings or Facts. And she, in that book, talks at some length about sort of the struggles between wanting to commit to a cause and sort of finding the shortcomings and the limitations of that, and interestingly, doesn't quite settle on either being apolitical or political.
Can I say one more quick thing to that? I think she was also struggling always with hierarchy and directorship. Hierarchy's everywhere, especially in the arts and in dance. It's there. But I think she was struggling with directorialship, and so she started a dance company, Grand Union, and then realized, actually really don't really want to direct this, and kind of turned it over. There was attempts at collectivity problems there as well, but I think there's always this grappling with hierarchy, collectivity, how to do things. And in the grappling, she once said to me, she said, Sarah, because at one point I thought, what's the point of dance? Why would I get up and have people look at me dance? I was a bit disdained about dance. She said, Sarah, make work about your problems. And she always made work about her problems. And so in her own way, she's addressing her own struggles with being a performer, with being looked at. Trio A was about trying to get away from the existentialism of being a performer, and it was pre-feminism and the male gaze. And she was just trying to figure out in her dance world and her choreographic methodologies, how do I struggle with the politics of my own being looked at and wanting to be looked at, and how can I create a dance that's going to complicate that for both me and the spectator? And that's where her brilliancy is, I think.
And on the note of complication, I would suggest, unless you object, that we give the last word to the dancers if they want to have it, to Esther, Emily, and Fred. And
Better
if not,
be nice.
And if and if not, then I would suggest that we open up to sort of individual Q&A over some drinks to celebrate Sarah, Emily, Esther, and Fred, and thank them for being here with us, and in absentia, really especially thank Yvonne for allowing us and sort of guiding us in letting us do this. And we're recording, so she'll hear the applause later. So please join me.
Wait 1 minute.
Oh yeah, sorry, the last word, sorry.
This was a great question. Thank you very much, because it's good that it's asked, because you watch dance, it happens always, and you're not one of those people who learn dance or who watches a lot of actually dance, and you wonder, and what is it, you know? And I don't have more, like you did a great answer, because we know Yvonne is, I mean, you know, I feel like I know her now. And her work, I mean, this was made 60s, that's one. It's a solo work also, I mean, it's not, but she made it on her own. And I don't quite know what I want to say, but it's a very good question, like, you know, and then where is the democracy in this work? Or what dance often does today as well, the ones who make dance today, they look at how society is run, and obviously you mentioned it, and they look at how are people organized, you know, in a room, and they do show ways of how we can do better, less hierarchy or whatever. This is one example of it. You know, it's directly politically, but it's maybe not actually going, I'm for Palestine or you know, the other type, like what you mentioned. But it is highly political work. If you look, you know, at actually her work, you know, like another work, this woman, I mean, you hear her talk, the woman's on it, you know. I loved hearing that of you because that opens it up. Thank you.
All right. Now, thank you.